Your heating bill last winter was probably hundreds of dollars, maybe more. And despite all of it, the insulation, the double-pane windows, the smart thermostat you spent 40 minutes setting up, your house was still cold. You know the feeling. You wake up at 3 in the morning, the system has been running for hours, and it is still not warm. You check the thermostat, you adjust it, you go back to bed and pull the blanket tighter. Now think about a medieval castle. Stone walls 10 feet thick, no electricity, no central heating, no thermostat. Temperatures dropping to minus 30 outside. Wind that has been building momentum across open countryside for 50 miles before it hits the walls. And yet, the people inside survived, every single winter for centuries, without a single heating bill. So the question is not, why were medieval castles cold? The question everyone gets wrong is assuming they were. The real question is, what did they know that your $400,000 home does not? Here is the short version. Medieval builders solved the heating problem so completely that some of their structures have been continuously livable for close to 1,000 years. Your house will not last 100. The gap between those two numbers is not an accident. 3 principles. Medieval builders understood all of them intuitively. Modern construction forgot all of them deliberately. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how a castle stayed warm, why your house struggles to do the same, and what you can actually do about it. Winter 1683, Windsor Castle, Berkshire, England. King Charles II and his court are in residence inside stone walls up to 12 feet thick, built originally by William the Conqueror and expanded over 6 centuries of occupation. Outside, England is in the grip of the worst winter in its recorded history, the Great Frost of 1683 to 1684, the coldest winter the central England temperature record has ever measured. Outdoor temperatures plunged to minus 12 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The Thames froze solid for 7 weeks. Contemporary accounts describe conditions as intolerably severe. There is no central heating, no insulation as the modern building industry would recognize it. The court survives, the castle functions, the people inside it endure a winter that would overwhelm almost every modern home on the planet. Outside, 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, a royal court going about its business in a stone building with no heating system beyond fireplaces and the walls themselves. 3 principles explain everything. Here is the first one. Here is the concept that changes how you think about buildings. Thermal mass. When you heat a space, you are not just warming the air, you are warming every surface the heat touches. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. The question is how much heat those surfaces can absorb and how slowly they release it once the heat source stops. Modern construction uses lightweight materials, timber frames, plasterboard, fiberglass insulation, thin external cladding. These materials have low thermal mass. They warm up quickly, which feels efficient, and they cool down quickly, which is the problem. The moment your heating system stops running, a modern home starts losing warmth almost immediately. The walls have nothing stored, your system kicks back on, you pay again. Stone is the opposite. Stone has extremely high thermal mass, it takes a long time to heat up and an equally long time to cool down. A wall of solid stone 10 feet thick, heated consistently over days and weeks of occupation, stores enormous quantities of thermal energy in its core. When the fire dies down overnight, the wall does not suddenly become cold, it radiates that stored heat back into the room slowly and continuously for hours, sometimes for days. The physics is confirmed by peer-reviewed measurement. Dr. Elena Lucci published research in the journal Energy and Buildings in 2017 measuring the actual thermal performance of historic stone masonry walls and found that real historic stone walls outperform what modern thermal models predict by up to 52%. The stone is doing more than the science says it should. We still do not fully understand why. The most direct controlled comparison was published in 2025 by researchers at a university in Poland. in a study titled Winter Thermal Resilience of Lightweight and Ground-Coupled Medium-Weight Buildings. 2 full-scale residential buildings, identical in geometry and layout but different in wall construction, were subjected to multi-day heating blackouts during the winter of 2024 to 2025. One was a lightweight timber frame structure, the other was a masonry building. When the heating was cut, the researchers measured how long each building could maintain a survivable interior temperature. The masonry building held above 59 degrees Fahrenheit for over 60 hours with no heat input at all. The timber frame building could not even come close. Same conditions, same blackout, completely different outcomes. The only variable was what the walls were made of. Castle walls stored enough heat to keep interior spaces warm for up to 3 days after the fire went completely out. 3 days. No fuel, no system running, just stone doing what stone does. Castle walls were not 10 to 20 feet thick because medieval engineers were being dramatic. They were that thick because war demanded it and physics rewarded it. The thickness that stopped a siege weapon also stored enough thermal energy to maintain a survivable interior temperature through a brutal northern European winter. 2 problems, 1 decision. That is engineering. Think about what that means in practical terms. A castle wall is not a passive shell. It is an active participant in the thermal system of the building. Every day the fires burn, it is absorbing. Every night the fire's down, it is releasing. The building is breathing heat in and out on a slow cycle measured in days, not minutes. Your drywall does not do this. It has no meaningful thermal capacity. It transmits temperature changes almost instantly. Hot outside, hot inside. Cold outside, cold inside. The wall is not helping you. It is just a surface separating your money from the weather. When the fire in the Great Hall burns for 8 hours and then dies, the air temperature in the room drops. The wall temperature does not. Not for days. That wall is paying forward the heat investment made hours earlier, releasing it slowly back into the space at exactly the moment it needed it most. This is the first thing medieval builders knew that modern construction forgot. The second thing medieval builders understood is compartmentalization. Walk through a medieval castle layout and you notice something immediately. The rooms are small, the ceilings are low, frequently around 6 to 7 feet in private chambers, even when the Great Hall soars much higher. The doors are heavy, every private space is designed to be sealed, there is no open plan. There are walls everywhere, thick ones with doors that close. Modern interior design has an almost religious attachment to open plan living. Remove the walls, create connection, let the space breathe. It looks excellent in photographs, but it's an absolute disaster for thermal efficiency. When you heat an open plan room, you are heating a large column of air, most of which rises to the ceiling where it does nobody any good. The warm air sits at the top, you sit at the bottom. You turn the heating up, the ceiling stays warm. You stay cold. You are paying to heat a space that is physically incapable of keeping you warm, and no amount of boiler upgrades changes that fundamental geometry. Medieval castle chambers did not have this problem. The lord or lady's personal chamber was frequently no larger than a modern master bedroom with a low ceiling, a heavy door, and a small hooded fireplace built into the exterior wall. You heated a small volume of air, the air stayed warm because there was nowhere for it to go. The fire was modest by Great Hall standards, and it was enough because the physics of the room demanded less of it. Tapestries are the detail everyone knows and almost nobody takes seriously enough as engineering. Robin Pender, a physicist and researcher at Historic England, published analysis in 2022 establishing that wall hangings in medieval buildings were actually functioning as radiant barriers, and this matters more than most people realize. Thermal physiologists have established that between 60 and 65% of the human body's heat loss in a cold room occurs not through cold air, but through radiation into surrounding cold surfaces. Your body is broadcasting heat directly into a cold stone wall, and you feel cold before the air temperature tells you anything is wrong. The air can be a perfectly comfortable temperature, and you still feel freezing because the dominant heat loss is not happening through the air at all. It is happening through the surface behind you. Medieval tapestries reduced heat loss to cold walls by up to 30%. The Building Research Establishment has documented that heavy textile wall hangings reduce radiant heat loss to cold masonry surfaces by that margin. Medieval tapestries, thick wool weave hung floor to ceiling and covering the full span of exterior walls, delivered exactly that reduction every night the garrison slept. Not decoration that happened to keep people warm, a thermal management system that happened to be beautiful. The same result. A modern radiant barrier costs hundreds of pounds to install. Medieval builders got it in wool and dye. Rushes on the floor served the same function at ground level. Several inches of dried rushes replaced seasonally, free, widely available, and effective as a conductive barrier between cold stone and human feet. Standing on bare stone in winter pulls heat out of your body faster than almost anything else in the room. The rushes stop that. Not luxury, engineering. Every single method medieval builders used in this section has been quietly reinvented by modern building science under a different name and a much larger price tag. Thermal mass as a formal design principle in passive house architecture. Heavy curtains across cold walls recommended by energy efficiency advisors. Rugs over cold floors. Small sealed rooms. The builders were not guessing, they were solving the same problem we are still solving. The third pillar is the one that surprises people most. The Great Hall fireplace was not decoration, it was a battery, and it charged itself once a day. The Great Hall fireplace in a medieval castle was not primarily a direct heat radiator, it was a thermal charging device. You burned it hot and fast, the stone surrounding the firebox absorbed enormous quantities of heat during combustion, heat that would otherwise go straight up the chimney. Then, over the following 12 to 18 hours, that stone mass released its stored energy slowly and consistently back into the room. The fire was the input. The stone was the battery. The room was the output. You charged the battery once, it powered the room for most of the day. This is almost identical in principle to what building historians call the masonry heater, a technology developed across Northern Europe and Scandinavia in the medieval period. A masonry heater burns extremely hot for a short period, driving exhaust gases through a long, winding internal channel within the stone mass before they reach the chimney. By the time the gases exit, most of their heat has been transferred to the surrounding stone. The heat storage effect means the stone radiates steadily for hours after the fire is out. You are not heating the room with fire, you are heating the stone with the fire, and then letting the stone heat the room at its own pace long after the flames are gone. Masonry heaters built in this tradition achieve combustion efficiencies of 80 to 90%, a figure documented by the Brick Industry Association in their technical research on Russian-style masonry heating systems and confirmed by University of Missouri Extension research on wood fuel heating. A conventional modern open fireplace, by contrast, delivers just 10 to 30% of its fuel energy to the room, losing the rest directly up the chimney. A medieval masonry heating system delivered 4 to 6 times more usable heat from the same fuel than a modern open fireplace. The romantic hearth that sells houses today is, thermally speaking, one of the worst inventions ever put in a home. The smaller private chambers used hooded fireplaces with a narrower firebox and a deep stone surround to maximize the thermal storage effect at smaller scale. A lady's room with a small hooded fireplace burning a modest quantity of wood was warm enough to sleep in comfortably on a hard winter night in northern Wales or Yorkshire. Burn hot, store it in stone, let the stone do the rest. Now for the part that should make you angry. After World War II, Europe and North America needed housing fast. Millions of displaced people, returning soldiers, growing families. Timber frame construction using dimensional lumber and plywood sheathing could raise a house in weeks rather than months. It was cheaper than masonry, it was faster, it required less skilled labor, it ticked every box the post-war housing crisis demanded. Nobody building in 1948 was thinking about what those houses would cost to heat in 2025. What it did not do was store heat. What it did not do was maintain thermal stability, and nobody particularly cared, because in the 1950s and 1960s, oil and gas were extraordinarily cheap. An inefficient house was a minor inconvenience when fuel cost almost nothing. You could heat a thermally useless building for pennies and nobody complained. The energy boom made thermal mass irrelevant as a commercial consideration almost overnight. Why build slowly in stone when you could build fast in timber and pay almost nothing to run it? The economics made the decision, the physics were ignored. Then the 1973 oil crisis happened. Fuel prices spiked. The answer the industry landed on was insulation, wrapping the lightweight timber frame in layers of fiberglass and foam to slow heat loss. This works, but insulation slows the rate at which a building loses heat. Thermal mass stores heat and releases it back. They are not the same thing. An insulated timber frame house with the heating off loses its warmth in hours. A solid stone castle with no insulation holds survivable temperatures for days. The industry made a choice between two fundamentally different approaches to the same problem, and it chose the one that was cheaper to build and more expensive to run. You were not part of that conversation, but you are paying for that decision every single month since. Almost every home built after 1950 is thermally inferior, at the level of basic physics, to a structure built in 1289. That is not an option. That is what the numbers say. The people who built Conwy Castle did not have that option. There was no boiler to turn on. There was no grid to connect to. There was stone and fire and physics and the knowledge that if they got it wrong, people died. That pressure-produced engineering we are still studying and still, in some cases, failing to match. You are probably not going to build a castle, but the principles that made those structures thermally brilliant are not locked behind medieval technology. Most of them are available in your existing home for a modest cost. First, treat your walls like tapestries did. Heavy lined curtains against cold exterior walls in rooms you occupy most create the same radiant barrier effect that medieval tapestries provided. Your body stops broadcasting heat into cold stone and starts feeling warm at a lower air temperature. You turn the thermostat down, you spend less money. The material costs are modest. The physics is identical to what kept a Welsh garrison warm in 1294. Second, seal and compartmentalize. Close the doors. Stop heating rooms you are not in. Stop heating large open spaces when you are occupying one corner of them. Medieval inhabitants understood intuitively that a small sealed room is easier to warm and easier to keep warm than an open space 3 times the size. The physics, it doesn't care about your interior design preference. A sealed room holds heat. An open plan bleeds it out. You do not have to put walls back up, but you can close the doors you have and use heavy door curtains to reduce air exchange between the spaces. Third, think about floor insulation. A thick rug over a cold floor does what castle rushes did. It interrupts the direct conductive contact between your feet and a cold surface. It reduces the sensation of cold at floor level, which is where you actually live, not at ceiling height where your thermostat senses the room as adequately warm. Modern underfloor insulation boards are inexpensive and widely available. The principle is identical to what medieval builders applied. Fourth, if you heat with solid fuel, burn it hot and short rather than slow and cool. A hot, fast burn transfers more energy to the surrounding structure and less up the chimney than a slow, smoldering fire. If you have a wood-burning stove with a quality thermal surround, soapstone and fire brick hold and radiate heat particularly well. You are applying exactly the same logic medieval builders used in their private chamber fireplaces. Burn hot, store in stone, let it radiate. These are applications of principles that worked in 1289 and work now because the physics has not changed. Here is what the movies will not tell you. Some medieval castles built in the 11th and 12th centuries are still livable today. They have been continuously occupied or regularly used for close to 1,000 years. No modern home built in 1950 will be standing in 2950. The comparison is not even close. These structures were not overbuilt out of ignorance or excess. They were built by people who understood that a building is only as good as the worst winter it will ever face, and who had no safety net if they got that calculation wrong. The people who built Conwy Castle had no boiler to fall back on, no grid to connect to. If the building failed in winter, people died. That pressure produced engineering we are still studying, and in most cases, still failing to match. The stone remembered, even if we did not.